to another episode of the Good Advise Podcast. You're tuning in to another episode of our awesome show. Thank you for tuning in today. We are talking about some stuff today that I think is pretty interesting. I was talking to a business owner who was thinking about how to make more money in his business. And he said, Blake, I just want to be able to, this is going to make him sound so lazy, and I don't mean it this way, but he was like, I just want to be able to sit at home and the sales just come in, I take the sales, and then I just do the work. And which I was like, yeah, that's like the dream gig, right? Like everybody, you don't have to actually get out there and sell. You don't actually meet people. You just make money doing nothing, I guess. I actually did make him sound pretty bad, but I get where he was coming from, because when you think about it, when it comes to growing your business, when it comes to taking your business to the next step, there is that whole question of, am I making enough money to keep the business going? Today, we're diving into an older conversation that we've had on this discussion, all about relationships, and how well our business does is directly tied to how well we are out there meeting people, building relationships. Even the power of meeting people one-on-one is important for your business. You may not realize this, but the podcast all started on a couple of interviews that came from me just messaging people on LinkedIn. Hey, just want to introduce myself, just want to meet you, hello, and the rest is history. We're going to be talking about all of that on the show today as we dive into this older conversation. But before we get into it, we got a quick promotion about one of the amazing businesses in our area. Stay tuned. Check it out. We'll be back soon. Hey, have you been thinking about your health insurance plan for this next year? Maybe you just jumped into the world of entrepreneurship and you're thinking, geez, is it possible to have a good insurance plan if I'm no longer working for a business? Maybe you're even running a business and you're thinking about, what does it look like to have an affordable group plan for your employees? Well, I want to tell you about Optimum Health Insurance. This is a customized health care plan for you and your family, and since 2018, they've been helping people get awesome, affordable health care coverage for really nothing at all. It's easy, it's hassle-free, and frankly, they're different from the big insurance companies that you might talk to. And crazy enough, you might even be paying less than what you've paid at a previous job when you were on some company health insurance plan. If you want to find out more and save money on your health insurance, you absolutely need to go check out OptimumHealthInsurancePlan.com. That's OptimumHealthInsurancePlan.com. That's today's sponsor. Enjoy this episode. You know, sometimes people ask me the question, which I'm 30 years old, and so I'm pretty young. And in fact, when it came to the consultancy that I was working for, most people, my peers, were anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 years older than me. And I'd say probably on average about 15 to 20 years older than me. Which then, you know, as I was working with clients, I would be definitely the young guy in the room, right? And so I come in and maybe I'm working with like an executive team or maybe some senior managers, or maybe it's like first-time managers. But so you have these people who, you know, they're at different parts of their life. And this guy who's 30 years old walks in, and it's kind of like, whoa, okay, you're what I kind of expected was this old dude, I guess, who was retired and was going to give me all of this wisdom. And so I can kind of throw people for a loop. And so in that, essentially what I've made a career out of is I really just help people. I just give advice. You know, it actually sounds a lot sexier than it is. You know, I work with these really great organizations and these great businesses and these great people, but essentially what I'm doing for a living is I'm just giving encouragement and advice. And so someone comes to me and they have a problem, and you know, because I've been blessed and fortunate to have some really great training and experience and exposure to different concepts, I usually have an answer that goes on to help them. But that whole process, it's really not, you know, anything earth-shattering. And many times it's what people already know. And so today is no different. And that what I want to talk about is the power of relationships. And really, it's not about relationships from a standpoint of how many friends can I have, or you know, how many Instagram followers do you have? Although I will talk about that in a moment. It's and I don't know if you've ever worked with someone. Sometimes when I work with people, and we do a lot in terms of, I say we as if I still worked at my at my firm. What I have done a lot of is, how do I help a team of people work really well together? And a classic response I might get sometimes is, hey, I didn't take this job to be friends with anyone. Or more specifically, I had a guy who I was working with him, and he said, hey, they didn't hire me to go to everyone's barbecue. And these are pretty fair points, right? I mean, you definitely, especially if you're more introverted, you're thinking preach, definitely. But it's definitely fair to say that, when you're signing on to a job, you aren't necessarily signing on to be BFFs with everybody, best friends. You're inviting them to your wedding. You're inviting them to all big family gatherings. That's totally fine. I totally get it. However, what I have seen be true is that the most successful people have these deep and wide relationships. They're connecting with a lot of people, and they're also taking time to really invest in some key relationships. And that's what I want to unpack. And in fact, what I used to do at my firm, what I still do today, is we do this thing called a 360. And it's called a 360 because a 360 makes it makes a circle shape. So I know this is pretty easy so far. Well, so a 360 is a circle, right? Or it's 360 degrees. And what a 360 essentially is, it's like a professional survey that you give to everyone who knows you. So you give it to your boss, you give it to your friends, your coworkers, your peers, maybe someone who's not a coworker but isn't a boss, but just someone who's higher up in the company. You give it to your direct reports. You even sometimes give it to your wife or husband. And essentially what happens on this survey is they write what they think about you. And so they essentially, there's these 20 different topics, these 20 categories, and each one is a different facet of who you are. And so one might be like your self-awareness, one might be your composure, one might be your strategic thinking. And so you have all these different categories. And what these people are doing is within these subcategories, or within these categories, you have these sub-questions that essentially, it's stuff like, let's talk about composure, for example. A question within that category might be, this person can stay calm and level-headed even in intense circumstances. Or this person rarely becomes combative or overwhelmed. Things like that. And so what your people in this 360 are doing is they're going through and they're marking on a scale from 1 to 5. They're essentially saying how not necessarily how good you are at this, but do they see you composed or not composed, right? And then after they've given you these scores, the 360 assessment will actually total up all of your scores, and it'll give you a number for that category. And then at the end, the people will actually go through and they'll write these lengthy responses as to why they gave you the scores they gave you. And so as you can imagine, it can be pretty exhaustive. And I promise you, it's a really incredible tool. Some of you listening right now, you're hearing me describe this tool and you're thinking, forget that. And I'll speak for myself. I always hope that people really like working with me and that they really like me as a person. And I'm always pretty curious to get that feedback, but there's a part of me that doesn't want it, right? Because there's like this fear of not necessarily who have I disappointed, but who have I wronged, and who has a really nasty perception of me, or who thinks that I'm just in it for myself. We don't always really like to be exposed to those things. And so 360 on a whole nother level of that, it's a really incredible tool. It gives you a lot of great data, but specifically it can be kind of intense to get all of that back. And of all of the categories, your people who are rating you, they're also marking which category is most important for success. And there's 2 categories that I want to share with you that over the last few years of doing these 360s, I've consistently seen 2 categories show up that are the most important. The first one is results. So can this person get results? And that one's pretty intuitive, right? Because people are thinking about, Can you actually do the job that you're hired to? Are you able to actually make it happen? The other one, though, is a little bit different. It's relationships. And these aren't necessarily opposites, but I wouldn't say they're both talked about evenly, right? In fact, I'd say that in some work cultures, whenever you mention relationships, that's where you do get the response of, well, I'm not here to make friends. Well, I can't help whose feelings I've hurt. We'll leave your emotions at the door. Stuff like that, right? But really, consistently what we've seen is that people, whenever they're thinking about what's most important to them, one is results and the other one is relationships. And I don't know if you've ever heard the expression of "it's who you know in life," but I've really come to find out how true that is. Not just from like a connection standpoint, but especially when I talk about being a successful entrepreneur, but especially even just if you're working in a 9-to-5 job, how can you be successful as a professional who day in and day out you're interacting with people? Because you do need people. You can't do your job alone, even if you think you can, right? And so I thought in talking about this, sometimes I get this question, and what I was originally saying a minute ago was I get this question of how the heck did you get into this big consulting job at such a young age? Because when I started, I guess I was 28 years old, and I was already like wrapped in the thick of it. I'm working with these incredible companies. I'm directly advising and directing and facilitating conversation and solutions. And it's almost like, what in the world, right? Like how did I get into this rather than retire after a 30-year career and jump into it? And the simple answer is really just relationships. The way it happened was I used to be a teacher. I was a high school teacher and had some really incredible kids. And then I moved. I did a pretty good job as a teacher, and I moved to Arkansas to get married, which was, by the way, a great decision. I highly recommend it. And so I married my beautiful wife, Joy, and began working here and started looking for the dream job, right? I wanted to find the dream job, find the job that would fulfill me. What did I enjoy in life? What did I want to do? Well, so while I was here, I was also engaged in this other, I was volunteering basically for this organization called Young Life, which really mentors young kids. And there was this guy by the name of Caleb who was running the college branch, the college arm of this nonprofit that essentially mentors college students, right? And I don't know what Caleb would say about this story, by the way, but funny enough, when I first met Caleb, I really didn't like him because his approach to impacting people was so different from mine. And maybe that's an entirely different story in and of itself of, what did it mean for me to kind of get over myself and really see the good in Caleb rather than being annoyed by the things I would do differently. I kind of had to get over my ego and be willing to extend an olive branch and connect with this guy. But so anyway, we had this once a year. Young Life does this walkathon where all of the volunteers meet at this high school or middle school track field, and they walk around the track, and it's essentially you're raising money to send kids to summer camp, because a lot of these kids come from a demographic where they would never ever be able to afford going to summer camp, and so essentially you're trying to raise support so that they can go and have an awesome summer, right? Well, so most volunteers who are in Young Life are in college, so they're in their late teens, early 20s. They're probably on average they're 19 to 21 years old, and most of all 19 and 20. So I'm like 28 years old, and I feel totally out of place, right? It's like when you think about back in the day when you were in college or maybe even in high school, and then years later you got around that same age group, and suddenly it's like, wow, I am a loser. Like, especially if you thought you were a cool person before, and then now you're around these people, and it's like, man, I am out of touch. I am not as clever or funny as I thought I was. And so I'm at this event. I'm looking around. I'm kind of thinking about, who am I going to walk next to, right? Because I don't want to be like a weirdo who walks by himself. Well, I see Caleb, and Caleb's actually pretty similar age to me because he had come on as a professional to help this college arm of the nonprofit. Well, so I decide to walk alongside Caleb. So we're talking, we're hanging out, and Caleb says, "Hey, are you looking for a job?" And I say, "Yeah, I am." And he starts telling me about this consulting firm that's looking to hire someone with an education background. And I thought it was a total, I was like, is this like a mom and pop store? What is this? And he was like, no, it's the real deal. And long story short, essentially what they were looking for was they had all this experience. They were looking for someone who had a critical eye towards teaching, curriculum, organization of content, stuff like that, because they had plenty of experience, right? I mean, they had people who'd done 30-year careers at these awesome, Procter and Gamble, General Mills, these really great places. And they were wanting someone who had been in education and who understood how do people best internalize information and best learn, right? Because, as you could probably guess, when you do consulting, you're not just collecting a paycheck. You're really wanting to help people change, grow, and develop, right? And so essentially, I came in as sort of this curriculum guy. And I remember like my first days there, I was going through all of the curriculum, making notes, changing things like that. Or making suggestions for these changes that needed to happen. And within about 6 months, almost everyone got let go because the founder had passed away and they had lost a chunk of their funding. And so almost everyone got let go after about 6 months, except for myself and a couple other people. And it rocked my world, right? I mean, you take on this job, and we had actually just put a down payment on a house. And so we're thinking, what the heck? We had our daughter in the form of our black lab dog named Sadie, who is basically our daughter. And I'm thinking, what am I doing in my life, right? Well, because I had always been someone internally who really believed in building relationships with one another, it wouldn't be uncommon that I'd come into the office and hang out with people. And, I just always wanted to connect with people. So whenever it came to people being let go, and me being kept on, which I was one of the few who got kept on, that played a big role, as well as my background in teaching and curriculum. And that's kind of a whole different story in and of itself. But the way that I got to where I am today, where now that I've advised and coached all of these incredible people, it literally came through this random guy, through some random nonprofit who I was just walking alongside, who we were kind of friends, and he said, "Hey, I heard this place is hiring," and one thing led to another. And that really kind of opened my eyes to this whole concept of it really is who you know in life. It really is the relationships that you form in life. I'll give you another example, one that was not so positive. Before I got that job, I was working part-time as a grad assistant for the U of A. And I actually went on to be an adjunct with the U of A. And there was a position that was open, and it was this position that its main focus was to work with the low socioeconomic status. The way we define an education is the percentage of free and reduced lunch. And so it was really because ideally sorry, I'm all scatterbrained here. If people need free and reduced lunch, that's because they can't pay for it on its own. And so if the body of these students, if there's a higher percentage that needs free or reduced lunch, that gives you an indicator of their financial circumstances. So like in Houston, for example, the percent free and reduced lunch was somewhere between 90 and 95%. In Arkansas, it's actually much lower because in general, or really in Northwest Arkansas, it's much lower. Because in Northwest Arkansas, schools are, for the most part, there's a lot more money and schools do a lot better job up here. Well, so there was, at the U of A, there was a position open, and the person in charge of this position, their job was to oversee these education initiatives for these underperforming school districts, so these underperforming schools. So I applied to it. I thought that I was a total shoo-in because my resume had been had included spending all of this time at working with these students at these schools. And I was actually pretty shocked when I didn't get the job. And I thought, how, not like in an arrogant way, like it had to be me, but I honestly was pretty surprised. And the reason I was more surprised was because the person that they chose had never stepped foot in a classroom before, had never taught a day in their life. And that just seemed really backwards to me, right? I thought, why would we have someone leading this initiative, this ed reform, who's never been in the classroom before? And I remember I went to one of my professors that I was friends with and was asking him about it. And he said, Blake, I'll be honest, it really is who you know. She's been working here for several years and it's kind of her turn, right? And I don't have any bitter feelings about that, because it's not that she hasn't gone on to be successful. I haven't followed her. I'm sure she has. But it kind of was like a punch to the gut, because I was like, it's who you know. What about who's most qualified? And rather than having like a super negative perception on that, where I I was like this victim and how dare the U of A, which by the way is an awesome institution, it kind of just opened my eyes to how true that statement is, and just like how it works practically, right? Because whether you like it or not, the relationships you're forming today, they are opening the pathways for you to go on and be more successful than you currently are being today, right? And so here's a really practical example. Here's a way to think about it. I was working with a nonprofit, 5 people. It was 5 women. One was the executive director, so she's the boss. It's kind of like the CEO. She has 4 employees, and her philosophy is very much, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to make a difference in the community, which kind of sounds like they are opposites. But she thought, when I come into work, I'm not looking to be besties with someone. I'm looking to get the job done. Her 4 employees, though, had a very different perspective. When they came in, it was, hey, how are you? And, what's been going on? Very clearly, I have no idea what girls talk about. But, they would come in and they would talk and they would hang out. And this really kind of drove the boss crazy, right? Because she's very results driven. She's very focused on making it happen. And it kind of gets on her nerves. And so she decides, I'm going to lead by example. So, imagine it's Monday morning and people are coming in and they're talking to each other. They're hanging out. How was your weekend? What's been going on? The boss comes in. She says nothing to anyone. She goes into her office, closes the door, and gets to work. Now, in her mind, she's thinking, I am giving them the perfect example of what needs to happen here. We're not here to make friends. We're here to get the job done. What's interesting about that is that some time went on, and this not-for-profit essentially got acquired by another organization, and they were thinking about, do we need to keep this staff of 5 or do we need to change it up a little bit? So they actually went and asked the staff and said, what do you think about the staff here? And what you probably would not be surprised to hear, after these conversations, they decided to let the executive director go and hire someone else. The irony of that is that she was probably the person who was getting the most work done. But what was happening was they're talking about culture, they're talking about how things work here, and so they're talking to her direct reports, and the direct reports are saying things like, she's really not very warm. I don't know if I really trust her. I don't know if she really has my best interests in mind. She's clearly a hard worker, but I just don't know if she's the right fit here. And so the boss's lack of attention and intention towards relationships is what then led her to not keep her job, basically. That might seem like an extreme example, but it happens all the time, every day in and day out, with a multitude of businesses. Your avenues in life are directly dictated by the relationships you're forming. it's not because you're trying to play the game. It's not because you're trying to manipulate people. It's like this concept of social proof, right? You are wanting to develop a rapport with people so that they know you and trust you and they can vet you and frankly, they can speak to your expertise because they understand where you're coming from. Think of it from this perspective. Imagine, and this is who I am, for example. Imagine you're someone who's very candid and very direct, and you just say your mind, and you just say exactly what needs to happen. In an environment where you have relationships with your people, and they know who you really are, and they know what drives you and motivates you, when you are very direct and candid, their reaction is something like, man, Blake will always say the hard truth. Blake will always say what no one else is willing to say. Man, we really need someone like Blake. Blake will get us focused and directed on what needs to happen. He will make it happen. In a different environment, one where no one knows you, no one really sees you, talks to you, has a relationship with you, you can have the exact same actions, and yet the results are totally different. Instead, what people are saying are things like, man, that Blake is such a jerk. Man, Blake is so abrasive. Man, Blake really knows how to tear people down. And then farther along from that, I don't know if we can survive with Blake on our team. Or I would really love to hire someone who has Blake's skill set, but just frankly a better personality. Contrast that with the opposite, where people really know you. We couldn't have made it here without Blake. So there's a very real indicator that, or I should say really a very real outcome that happens from your relationships. The same thing is true from any kind of sales perspective. I was talking with a guy who he was saying he wants to be a realtor, and we were kind of talking it through, and I said, what do you love about realty? What's your plan? And he said, well, right now I'm just trying to grow my market. I'm trying to grow my brand. I'm trying to get some steady income. And I said, okay, awesome. What are you doing for that? And he said, well, I'm making flyers and I'm doing some ads on Facebook, and I am just paying for a website, and these are all things that are fine, by the way. But I said, okay, well, who are you out there meeting? And he goes, oh, well, I'm kind of an introvert, so I don't really like to go meet people. And which was very interesting, because not that you can't be an introvert and be successful, but in the business of realty, there's really not much difference from one realtor to the other. In fact, if you were to ask some random person, what's the difference between this realty group and that one, no one would ever say anything about percentages. No one would ever say anything about commission. None of that would ever be mentioned whatsoever. Instead, what someone would say would be something like, I can trust them. They got the best deal for me. I know the person there, right? And so I was even thinking about, we have a guy at our, my wife and I, this church we go to on Sundays, we have a guy there whose name is Chris, and everyone knows him as the real estate guy because he has his own realty group. And so whenever someone needs to sell a house, who they think of is him, because he has spent the time, energy, and effort getting to know people, building relationships, what have you. So going back to this guy who was asking me for advice, I said, introvert or not, you need to get out there and start meeting people face to face and building trust with them so they know you, right? So they know what drives you, because that's the differentiator between you and someone else. And so when you think about being successful in person, obviously you have this sort of results management that you're having to worry about in terms of, do I know how to do my job? Am I doing it well? Am I doing it effectively? On the other hand, you have something called relationship management, and that is understanding what is the nature of your relationships. Am I growing my relationships? It's actually what led me to be very successful as a salesperson when I first started. Because I had no sales background. The one thing I knew I didn't want to be true about me was that I didn't want to be like a used car salesperson, right? Or it's kind of like, whenever the university calls me for a donation and they say, would you donate $100 today? And I say, no, sorry, I don't think so. And they go, would you donate $50 today? And it's like, no, that's okay. And they just keep going down because it's like, please give me something. And in the same way, I kind of feel like in sales in general, we have sort of this hard sell where we really try to get someone to buy our product. And it's very insincere. I really don't appreciate it at all whatsoever. But what always stuck with me was there was this beat writer for the NBA who's kind of revered as being this guy who always has the first scoop on big stories. And so he's the one who broke the scoop on KD leaving the Oklahoma City Thunder and going to Golden State. He just has constantly these bombs that come out that no one saw coming, and he's always the first one to break the story. And so people were asking him, what has made you so successful? Because there's plenty of beat writers out there. There's plenty of reporters. Why have you been someone who you seem to have such an insight with so many front offices, with so many GMs, with so many coaches, players, how? What is your secret? And he said, well, these other writers, reporters, what they're doing is they're only calling the GM when they want a story. They're only calling the GM when they want a quote. What I do is when I'm in LA or Dallas or wherever, I'm calling the GM and I'm asking, "Hey, can I take you out to dinner?" And I'm not trying to get to anything. I have no story I need to comment on. He said 70% of my time is spent on building relationships, so that whenever they do have a story or a scoop or something, they think of me versus someone else because they know me and they trust me. So my approach for sales has always been the same way, right? And so, whenever I would take someone out to lunch or I'd take someone to coffee, 9 times out of 10, I was taking someone to lunch when we had no contract in place. There was no statement I needed signed. There was nothing. I just wanted to be their guy. And that led me to being very successful literally in just my first year of sales when no one knew me. I didn't have any experience. I just knew what I didn't want to be, and that was insincere. And what's really stuck with me is I was talking to a guy who had a lengthy career at Procter & Gamble, and he said, you know what the worst thing someone can say to you at your career or say about you? And I had kind of some random answers like, well, I'm in it for myself, or I'm selfish, or I'm not a team player. And he goes, no. Worse things than that. And I said, okay, what's the worst thing? He said, the worst thing someone can say about you is I don't know them. Which, the first one sounded a lot worse, right? I mean, what's the big deal if someone doesn't know you? And he said, well, essentially what happens is whenever people are making long-term decisions for the sake of the company, for people they want to partner with, potential clients of yours, who do they want to hire? They're saying one of 3 things. This person's effective, this person's ineffective, or I don't know him, or I don't know her. And that last one is such a carnal sin because it's there's no excuse for it, right? And if you're someone who you aren't naturally a very relationship driven person, what I'm not talking about is every day you have a 2-hour lunch with people, right? But I do have people that every few weeks, hey, let's grab a cup of coffee. In fact, what's kind of funny from a sales perspective is that some people they're so burned by salespeople in general that they don't believe me. And so I'm like, I'm not looking to talk about anything other than grab coffee with you. And they're like, really? Is that really what we're doing? But in general, the most successful people that I've worked with, that's what they're doing, right? I was talking to an executive who he was saying something along the lines of, after we had gotten done, he said, so you're telling me that, and this was an idea that he came up with, every morning I should spend 5 minutes just saying hello to my people? And he kind of thought I was messing with them. And I said, yeah, why not? Right? Why not spend 5 minutes? If your cost is 5 minutes for a result of people trusting you more and knowing your drive more and your motive more, why wouldn't you do it? Why not do it, right? So let's talk practical. What are some things that you can do today? First of all, you can think about your personality and how you are naturally driving the relationships in your life. The second thing you can do is just be intentional. I feel like we as a culture are very reactive to who's inviting me out, who's asking me to coffee, who's doing what have you. And I think it's important to be the person who's the initiator, who's reaching out, who's contacting people, and really just building the relationships you can, right? Because ideally, it's life is, and this is going to sound kind of silly, but life is a long game, right? So I don't call someone because I need something from them right then and there. I call someone because I want to spend time with them, and 6 months down the road, it can turn into a relationship that is productive for that person as well as productive for me. It's so funny. I'm been working on my website and just different things of my business. And there's a guy who just moved here from Tyler, Texas. And I was like, man, let's hang out. Let's watch some football. I cut my cable. So what I do now is I just blatantly mooch off other people. And so he told me he had Red Zone for NFL. And I said, hey man, I'd love to come by and check it out. And so I went over, we hung out, we watched some games, and we're just hanging out. And really that was my only motive, was this guy's new here. I don't want him to be alone. I don't want him to not have any friends. Him and his wife had come here, and I wanted them to be able to connect with people. So we go over, we start hanging out, we start watching the game, and he's asking me, hey, so what do you do? And I said, well, I have this business. And he said, what's been the biggest struggle? And I said, really, just advertising and like optimizing my website. And he said, oh, that's funny. I just sold my company where I did that for a living. And he offered to help me work on it and make it better. And that came out of a totally just through coincidence of making a new relationship. And so as you are thinking about your future success, I'm biased in thinking that relationships are number one, but I want to challenge you to spend a few more minutes each day investing in those relationships, investing in people. Crazily enough, I want to challenge you to take someone to coffee, go to lunch with someone where you want nothing in return other than to connect with that person. And if you can do that, I think you'd be surprised for the results and the success you'll see long term. Because really, like I said, the way I got into this really lucrative, incredible business, I never went to business school. I never got an MBA. I never did an internship somewhere that taught me the ropes about businesses. It literally happened on a random middle school track field of some random nonprofit with some random guy who I walked alongside only because we were the same age. That's how crazy it can pan out when it comes to the power of relationships. So get out there, make some new relationships, grow the ones you have today, and make it happen. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see you.